For centuries, there's been this intense debate over the true name of God. But what if the answer wasn't just hiding in theology, but in architecture? Today, we're going to walk through a really specific, evidence based case for the name above all names. Okay, let's get into it. We're going to look at this like a legal case with 6 key exhibits. We'll start with a fracture in the common understanding, then look at a foundational legal decree, trace a historical chain of custody, hear from a decisive witness in Scripture, see the architectural proof, and then land on the final question that pulls it all together. All right, first up, the fracture in the name. The whole argument really kicks off by pointing out a serious crack in the foundation of the common 4-letter name. So, that familiar 4-letter name, the Tetragrammaton, well, the moment we try to write it in English, it hits a problem. It immediately splits into 2 main spellings, YHVH and YHWH. Why? Because the Hebrew letter Vav can be a V or a W. Now, this isn't just some little typo. The argument is that this is a structural fracture right at the heart of the claim. So to test this instability, the source uses a method it calls cross-examination. And let's be super clear about what this means. The point is not, I repeat, not to use English to define Hebrew. The whole idea is to use a consistent system to test how stable the 4-letter claim really is, right in the place where it shows its weakness, English transliteration, where its defenders have to use these competing spellings. It's about testing the claim by its own rules. And this leads us to a really core idea here. A true regnal name, a king's official title, it should be like a strong tower. It's supposed to be stable. It's supposed to hold up under pressure, not crack apart and force everyone to argue about how to patch it back together, which is exactly what we see happening. Okay, let's move on to our second exhibit because this is where the case really starts to build. We're looking at the enthronement decree. What the source argues is the actual foundational legal act that establishes the name. The absolute cornerstone of the argument is this verse from Psalm 68, pulled straight from the 1539 Great Bible, which was the first officially authorized English Bible. It doesn't give you some complicated 4-letter puzzle. It makes a direct, legal, almost blunt declaration. IA is his name. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Oh, that's just some pretty devotional poetry. But the source argues that's a huge category error. See, Psalm 68 isn't just a song. It's the record of a singular, never-to-be-repeated event, the enthronement of God in Zion. It's a coronation. It's a legal act that establishes law and authority. Think about it like this. You only install a throne once, and it's only after the king is seated that law officially comes from that throne. This argument frames Psalm 68 as that very moment. So the name that's proclaimed isn't just a nice sentiment, it's the regnal constitutional name. So once that legal decree is on the table, the case brings in its corroborating witnesses. This is our third section, a chain of custody. And this timeline is just brilliant. It shows a clear, unbroken chain of custody for the name IA. It goes all the way from ancient Paleo-Hebrew inscriptions through a 5th century historian who reported that Jews pronounced the name as Ia, and right up to that 1539 Crown-authorized Bible. The point is, this isn't some modern theory, it's a history of preservation.
Let's just zoom in on that first piece of evidence for a second. In Paleo-Hebrew, the name we know today as Zechariah is written ZKR-IA. Now, ZKR means to remember or immemorial. So the name itself literally means remembrance of IA. The memorial, the actual act of remembering, preserves the 2-letter name, not a 4-letter one. What's being remembered is what was given in the first place.
Okay, let's bring in our 4th witness. And honestly, this might be the most decisive one of all, the Church of Philadelphia, and the powerful evidence hidden right there in its own name. This is just fantastic. Take a look at this. The name Philadelphia actually preserves the 2-letter divine name across all 3 key scriptural languages. In Greek, it ends in Ia. In Hebrew, it ends in Aya. And in English, Ia. That ending in every single case is Aya, Yod, He in Hebrew, Iota, Alpha in Greek. It's right there. And this hooks directly into the praise this church gets in the book of Revelation. You have kept my word and have not denied my name. The argument here is just devastatingly simple. How could the Church of Philadelphia possibly deny the very name that it carries in its own identity? All right, for our 5th section, we're circling all the way back to that first problem, the fractured 4-letter name. But now we're going to apply that cross-examination lens we talked about earlier. And remember, the argument is not that numbers define the name, but that they can show us the instability of the alternative claim. So here's where that cross-examination gets really interesting. When you apply a consistent English numbering system to those two broken spellings, a wild pattern shows up. YVH adds up to 63, which boils down to a digital root of 9, the number for the letter I. YHWH adds up to 64, which boils down to 1, the number for the letter A. The two fractured spellings actually resolve into the two separate components of IA. So the huge takeaway here is that the fracture isn't just random chaos. The two unstable pieces, when you test them, don't just fly apart. They actually point back. They converge on the two pieces of the stable name Aya. The instability of the four-letter claim literally collapses back toward the stable root that was legally installed at the enthronement. And all of this brings us to the closing argument, which perfectly frames the entire debate around one final critical question. Are we talking about custody, or are we talking about reconstruction? And this really is the core logic. Let's just be absolutely clear on this. The numbers are not being used to dictate the name. They are being used to corroborate the collapse of the alternative. They expose the fact that the four-letter claim just isn't a stable identity. Right in the very domain, transliteration, where its defenders have to rely on it. So at the end of the day, it really comes down to two completely different ways of thinking. There's custody, which is all about preserving what was originally given, exactly as it was given. And then there's reconstruction, which is the attempt to rebuild a name that you assume has been lost or broken. This case argues from start to finish that it's entirely a matter of custody. And that leaves us with this final thought to really chew on. The case has been laid out. All the exhibits have been presented. So the question that's left for us to ponder is this: what is the real difference between keeping a name that was never lost and reconstructing one that you only believe was?